It is the Amber Nectar podcast. Welcome along if you're watching us live on Periscope, or indeed if you've logged into the Amber Nectar YouTube page and you're watching us after the event. Of course, this podcast is still a podcast, and that's how it started, as an audio-only experience. And if you want the audio-only experience, because you can't stand looking at us three, and let's face it, who would, then you can download us from SoundCloud or from iTunes. And a lot to talk about, as usual. I'm going to let Les start, just because Andy's feeling really crook tonight and almost didn't turn up this evening. You can probably hear him sniffing down our new deluxe microphone.
Passed a late fitness test.
Well, he didn't really pass it. We kind of blackmailed him to come here. The Arsenal game has caused all sorts of debate from people who aren't emotionally involved with either Hull City or Arsenal, actually, Les, because it was all about the refereeing. And I suppose we should take, like they do on Match of the Day, we should take each controversial decision one by one. Ultimately, though, before we do, did City actually deserve to lose the game, do you think?
No, I don't think we did. I think City played really well. I think on the balance of play, we perhaps deserved to go one goal down when we did, because it's easy to forget in all the controversy of Sanchez's goal that City were really living dangerously for quite a while, and we'd been doing all sorts of like backwards headers and back passes, and we were just really asking for it. And when they actually did put it in, before it became evident that a hand had been involved in the process, you sort of, I think you thought you'd seen it coming, but then you started to see the replays, and that's when the controversy come in. But no, City played really well, and after sort of weathering the storm early on, I thought City were creating the better chances. That one where Grzycki put a ball in for Nias was fantastic, and I think Ian Wright said, he should have tried headed across goal. Phenomenally difficult thing to do. I think just getting on target was an achievement. My main annoyance was with Nias for the lack of anticipation after Markovic's fantastic run. I mean, Markovic really looked up for that game, maybe chomping at the bit after not being able to play against Liverpool. But he was just effortlessly skipping past players. And you could see Nias gesturing for the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. And Markovic put the ball on a plate for him. He didn't need to do anything spectacular. He just needed to flail out a limb. And with Clattenburg, it didn't even matter what limb it was. and he could have put it in. So I was a bit incensed at Nias for that just lack of anticipation, when he'd sort of been, with his body language, expressing annoyance that Lazar hadn't passed, but Lazar first name terms, but Markovic wanted to keep on the ball to truly open Arsenal up, and he did, and sadly Nias didn't react.
Yeah, I thought City were terrific, although I still wonder if we were just maybe 5 or 10% off some of the heights that were scaled against Liverpool. It was still a good performance, and I guess you can see it from a few different angles as to whether or not we truly deserved a point, because I got the feeling that we didn't quite execute things in the way that maybe we could have done. One or two final balls weren't quite right. Of course, there's the lack of anticipation for Markovic's cross. Nias could have perhaps done other things with that header from Grzycki's cross, and you can pick all these little things out, and it's probably why we're at this end of the table rather than Arsenal's end of the table. But in as much as you can take positives from a defeat, which is something we've got used to doing this season, we can definitely take positives from this defeat. I think it was a good performance. Arsenal not at their best, but they still were given a hell of a good game, and refereeing decisions, we'll come to those in a second, but I thought City gave them a real solid examination, and we're much further ahead in terms of points than I thought we'd be 6 weeks ago when this run of fixtures was coming up. We've got through them unscathed. When we haven't won or haven't got any points, we've still played well. So I'm feeling good. I'm still feeling confident after the Arsenal game, even though we didn't get a point. And I think my final observation on the Arsenal game, I was disappointed not to get a point. And previously I'd have been content with a 2-0 defeat. You'd have thought that's okay, that's tolerable. We've got out of here without a goal difference, taking another smash in. As it is, we're now looking at individual events during the match and thinking, if that had been different, actually we could have got a point, and that in itself is a huge sign of progress.
Rather than a blanket, we weren't good enough.
Yeah.
Who impressed you, Matt?
Well, It was. I mean, Andy alluded to it, but the Amber Nectar phrase that we've had on our forums over the years was the oddly enjoyable defeat. And actually, it was less enjoyable than it could have been. And I know that sounds really weird when talking about it in the context of a defeat, because ultimately, and we're going to come to the refereeing decisions in a moment, but ultimately it was a tale of two handballs, wasn't it? And when is a handball a handball? Is it when the ball hits a player's hand and goes into your net, or is it when the ball hits a player's hand to stop it going into your net? And, you know, that's something we'll talk about, because ultimately the ball struck two different hands twice, and both decisions went against City when the opinion certainly divided, not least around this table. I was impressed with Markovic. I was also impressed yet again with Huddleston. And I know Huddleston's supposed to be mature. He's 30 years old. But there is a visible maturity now to Huddleston. It's as if Marco Silva has given him actual leadership. And whatever else Huddleston has been in his career, because of the type of player he is, he's been sort of put across as this creative force, this creative leader. Even in his days at Tottenham, there was nobody, apart from possibly when Modric was playing for Tottenham, there was nobody more creative in the Tottenham first team squad than Huddleston. But he didn't have actual leadership. He was never a captain. He was never doing the coin toss. He was never... Maybe he's just not the most vocal of characters, but I think a combination of... First of all, Huddleston's got a great reputation, around a pan-European reputation. Silva will have known all about him. Seriously will have known all about him. Secondly, some other experienced players and creative players, for that matter, have left in recent times. Thirdly, a lot of new faces have come in. And I think Silva has just looked at Huddleston and said, you're experienced, you're... an excellent footballer who people can look up to on ability alone. Go out there and lead, even if you're not the actual captain wearing the armband. He's as good as, especially with Michael Dawson and Curtis Davis currently not involved. I think Huddleston's been absolutely magnificent recently.
It helps that he's in the form of his career as well, because he can lead by example, even if he can't lead by fist pumping.
But maybe that the reason why he's in the form of his career is because he's been made to feel good by Marco Silva about the sort of player he is and the sort of character he is. Maybe he's never had that before. I mean, as great a player as he was for Spurs, and he was there for 9 years, and they don't hold on to players for 9 years unless they're half decent. Maybe all those different successions of Spurs managers that had him, people like Andre Villas-Boas and Harry Redknapp and Martin Jol and the rest of them, maybe they just never saw him as anything more than a creative leader on the park rather than an actual leader of men. And he's acting like one. He has to, because he's the most experienced player in our team at the moment, in the absence of Davis and Dawson. So there's and you know, Huddleston also getting involved in the little spat between Walcott. I say little literally in Walcott's case, the spat between Walcott and Maguire, which is one of the funniest things. It was better than any sitcom that's been on in the last year in terms of just pure laughter that it created. But Huddleston getting involved with that, possibly because he needed to, in order to prevent Maguire from doing something stupid as a much younger, inexperienced player, but also because he felt maybe that he'd been primed to do so, to step into situations like that by this new feeling of leadership that he has under Marco Silva while he's on the pitch playing for City.
I think it's fair to say that Huddleston won't have been coached as much by any manager at City as much as he has been by Silva. And I don't just mean because head coach is his title, but it's clear that's what he does, that's what he believes in. And, you know, you've seen his talk to substitutes. He's all about instilling an ethos, telling players what he wants to do. Whereas I think Steve Bruce and Mike Phelan were the sort of managers where they would say, well, I trust you to go out and play well, but when we're expecting the finished end product rather than thinking, I can coach more football out of him, and that's the approach Silva seems to have taken, and it seems to have benefited Huddleston as well as Mailer, the most of the pre-existing players.
On Huddleston, I wonder if turning 30 has had anything to do with it, because it must be, you're very much aware when you turn 30 you've got more years behind you than you have ahead in your football career, and it could just possibly be the thing that's focused his mind, that it's now or never. If he's going to kick on, if he's going to have any chance of ever playing for England, which is still a long shot, but maybe if he keeps this form up for another 18 months, but it's now or never, and I do wonder if that is just a little thing that's helped him hit the heights again.
He's had his contract extended. The way things are going for him and for the team, he'll have another season of Premier League football with City ahead of him. Maybe he sees us now as an actual future for him. Because there's no doubt, I think, that Huddleston has been ambitious. He went to Tottenham very young from Derby, an obvious talent as a teenager, and went to Derby, I think, when he was 19 or 20. Went from Derby, sorry, to Tottenham when he was 19 or 20. And was, I mean, the Tottenham fans loved him while being also slightly frustrated by him because he was laconic and because he didn't score enough goals, even though he did shoot a lot from distance. I remember you on Amber Nectar years ago saying what a great player you thought Huddleston was when he was at Tottenham, and I think he didn't fit the sort of the archetype of the English footballer, and in a way that's a good thing because we often need to try and get away from the archetype of the hard-working but limited English footballer because it always cocks up our chances internationally every other year. There's just something about Huddleston now that makes... I think he now... I might be wrong, I don't know him, but I think he now likes the idea of being a Hull City legend, an icon. And even if that only takes another season and a half and he's 31 and Silva decides to do something else, assuming we've still got Silva, of course, then so be it. But I just think he likes that idea of being a legend of a club. I think all footballers, you know, there are a lot of much-travelled footballers, past and present. I think a lot of them who've been much-travelled have picked up the signing on fees, got the new houses, got the kids in a new school every 2 years, but they've finished their careers and they're very lucky for all these short periods at different clubs if they're ever regarded as a legend by any one club because they're often not there long enough. And I think with Huddleston, 9 years at Spurs followed by whatever it might be, 5 or 6 years or even longer possibly at City, and I think he might just feel like he's capable of becoming a legend. And I think all footballers, when they finish playing, would like to be warmly greeted back by at least one of the clubs that they play for.
I don't think there's a single City player couldn't be transformed into a legend by Marco Silva. I think the reason Huddleston isn't still at Tottenham, or a club in that sort of echelon, is he lacks pace. But Silva's playing in a role where the lack of pace really doesn't go against him at all, does it?
No, not at all. But, you know, I hate to bring up this name because it makes you two go boo, but Jan Molby was a central midfielder at Liverpool and for Denmark who clearly had no pace, but they always used to say all those yards of pace that he lacks are actually in his head. And Huddleston's like that. You see Huddleston pick up the ball in the centre circle, 5 seconds later he's pinged it 40 yards onto somebody's toe on one of the two wings, and you wonder, well, not only how did he do that, but how did he have time to do that, and how did he see the player in question in order to be able to do that? But that's the natural footballer within Tom Huddleston that we're just starting to see. The way that Marco Silva is picking teams and the way he's getting them to play is clearly benefiting Huddleston, and maybe not so much under Steve Bruce. Huddleston's attitude was in question at times then, but certainly under Mike Phelan, I don't think we appreciated that Huddleston needed to have the team a little bit more built around him, and at the moment I think it is being built a little bit around him.
If that's what Marco Silva wants to do, then it's a significant responsibility for Huddleston. But he's at the time in his career where perhaps that responsibility is going to be better met than it would have been 5 years ago, when he may have wanted carrying, or he may have wanted to be a showier kind of player rather than the fulcrum of a team in the way that Silva is maybe designing things.
And for all this smoke blowing we're doing with Huddleston, of course, the other reason why he could be playing so well is because he's seen Snodgrass and Livermore disappear to allegedly bigger clubs, and he's thinking, well, why isn't anybody coming for me? Oh, okay, then I better start playing a bit better, and then maybe somebody do it in the summer. Of course, football's a very cynical and ruthless industry. It could just be as simple as that.
You're listening to the Tom Huddleston podcast.
I hope he's listening. All right, let's look. The elephant in the room has got a syrup, and his name is Mark Clattenburg. Andy and Les are both. These two are the two that referred to on things we think as the qualified referees. I'm not. I just like to think I am. Is it handball when it goes into the net from an attacking player any more or any less than it's handball when a defender stops the ball from going into his own net? Discuss.
Not according to the laws of the game, and I went into some depth on that on things we think this morning. I think
a lot of depth.
I think part of the problem is that a lot of people attack this from what they think the rules should be, and I've been getting a lot of stick on Twitter because I've been discussing it the way the laws of the game are. And there's a lot of people who will say, oh, it's illegal to score a goal off your hand. You know, it's just illegal whether you intended it or not. But these are people who have decided to completely ignore that FIFA's laws of the game aren't hidden away. They're not like some mystical book on Dumbledore's bookshelf. It's freely available, and if you read it, and although some of the wording on the ruling on handball has changed, what hasn't changed is it's all about deliberateness of action. And my belief with Sanchez is that Sanchez simply couldn't have had time to process the thought, I'm going to slap this in the net. I know his hand was in front of him because he'd been stretching for a shot, so he was balancing himself. And a couple of years ago, you could have realistically have said, well, the guidance on the application of the laws of the game talks about arms being in an unnatural position. But that wording's gone now, because let's face it, there aren't truly that many unnatural positions when you're an athlete and you have to run and you have to tackle and you have to shoot. You know, your body is going to take all sorts of odd positions.
The problem with this Sanchez goal, though, ultimately, is that it went in off his hand, and it's clear that he didn't intend to do it. Now, most goals that have gone in off somebody's hand, whether they've been allowed or whether they're like Ahmed El Mohammadi and always disallowed, generally tend to be deliberate acts. The most famous one being back in '86 by Maradona. Does anybody remember Dennis Wise's England debut? It was old. Yes, you are. It was, well, you would have been. Let me think. You'd have been probably 10 or 11. Anyway, early '90s, Graham Taylor era, and he got a debut. He was playing. He just joined Chelsea, and he was playing for England in Turkey. I think it was a qualifier, and England won 1-0 with a goal from Dennis Wise. And what happened was, a set piece came in. It was headed into the 6-yard box. Dennis Wise swung his foot at it, completely air-shotted it, and his trailing hand behind him then hit the ball as it went under his body and went into the net. And the Turkey players all complained, and the goal was given because it was an undeliberate act of handball. Now, even though Phoenix from the Flames on Fantasy Football took the mickey out of him by punching the ball into the net when they reenacted it, there was very little controversy about the goal because it was deemed that Dennis Wise did not intend to handle a ball. And I'm kind of, I don't know who's, I've got sympathy on both sides of this. And I'm trying to be partisan because this is a partisan podcast. I think the goal was correctly given.
I will totally accept the point that it feels unjust. I'm not so robotically letter of the law about it that I can't see that. It feels wrong that the ball can hit a striker hand, go in, and a goal be awarded. But you have to go with the way the laws are, and it's purely about intent. And
it's the difference between the laws of the game and the spirit of the game. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the spirit of the game. But Sanchez didn't handle that ball against the spirit of the game. He couldn't help it.
I don't think he could help it. Because the thing is, the one thing that we lose perspective of when we see slow motion replays, and these replays take 3, 4, 5 seconds, and when we're watching them, we're thinking at the same speed as the slow motion replay, and we forget sometimes that it didn't happen like that. That happened so quickly that Sanchez had no idea that the ball was coming back at him. And I read somebody say on Twitter, oh, well, maybe he's thought, I'll just leave my hand there. You could not say that sentence or process that thought in the time it took from the ball leaving his foot, ricocheting off Jakupovic and hitting him hitting on the arm. I find it really unfortunate, but I don't believe necessarily the law really needs changing on this one. I think intent should be what it's all judged on.
Just before you come in, Andy, though, question for you, Les, on this point then. Why would Clattenburg then apologise to the players at half-time for giving the goal?
That's what I really don't understand. I think that, his biggest mistake of the afternoon was not sending Gibbs off. I believe
Correct.
That was just a straight red card. I don't buy he wasn't going towards goal. A simple touch after.
Well, the reason why
Gibbs.
Sorry, the reason why Markovic and the ball were going away from goal is because that's where Gibbs sent them.
Yeah, agreed. But I don't understand it. But the thing is, we don't truly know what the nature of the apology was. There's often a dissonance between what somebody says and how somebody interprets it. And if he said, I have to say, I'm sorry, I didn't see it, I went with my colleague's judgment. Somebody can hear that and say, oh, he said sorry, he feels he shouldn't have given the penalty. We don't actually know what he said, but we do know that the players saw it as an apology. But when Huddleston spoke on Match of the Day and said, oh, the ref said he didn't see it, that didn't sound to me as if he was saying, I absolutely got the decision wrong. He was just saying he didn't see it. Silva's account makes it sound a little bit different, but Silva's going to want to put it in that way. It's an easy way out to pin stuff on the referee when sometimes you can think, well, there's little bits that we didn't quite do and we couldn't do. And I sometimes found it a little bit of a cop-out to put it all on the referee, although undoubtedly he did make errors.
Right, Andy, we're going to turn and face you now. Your turn.
Well,
this will be interesting.
I don't significantly differ from any of that. I would have given the goal. It does pain you to say it, because you'd much rather believe that you were the victims of a colossal injustice, particularly at the hands of so dislikable an outfit as Arsenal. But there's nothing you could have done about it. There really honestly wasn't. And so long as the laws do specify intent, then that's got to be taken into account. It might be cleaner and easier for this notion of intent to be removed from the laws and that all instances of the ball striking the hand are punished. That would be difficult for defenders especially, who would find swathes of penalties given against them, but it would certainly clean the laws up in the way that once upon a time intent was removed from such things as fouls and tripping and the such like a long time ago, but perhaps that seemed as revolutionary then as removing intent from handball would be now. But intent is there and it wasn't intentional, and you have to give the goal. Now, where I do think Mr. Clattenburg asked up, you've touched on Gibbs, but he got other things wrong as well in what really wasn't a pretty afternoon for him. I'm not sure that Klukas' handball was deliberate, and while there's an argument that it was perhaps more avoidable in that the ball was further away from him and not the instant that was present for Sanchez's touch of the hand with, I still don't think that's deliberate handball, because he's not going to mean to do it. He's clearly angling his body towards the ball. His arm is not in an unnatural position, being as it's tucked up right next to his body. And I think if you don't give one, you shouldn't really give the other one.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say, this is the issue, isn't it? We've got two handballs here, albeit one an attacking handball and one a defensive handball, which need to be interpreted identically. And they weren't, because they both benefited Arsenal. Ultimately,
they weren't identical situations. I think that we should stress.
But they were. But in terms of the manner, the circumstances in which arm or hand in Sanchez's case, arm in Klukas' case, connected with the ball, they were pretty much identical.
Neither was meant.
Is there ever a situation where they'd be treated identically though? Because I've heard some people calling for video refs, but with a video ref, it isn't a robot, an unfeeling, unthinking machine making the decision. It's somebody reviewing it. And if we can look at the Klukas incident a few days later and say, well, I'm still not quite sure whether he meant it or not, is that really the answer? Does that really clear anything up?
I don't like the idea of video refs, which probably makes me a massive Luddite, but
no, I'm with you completely.
I'm happy to just let it's a game for humans. Players make mistakes, refs make mistakes. Why don't we all just grow up a bit and accept that this happens?
The goal line technology thing has really worked because it hasn't involved a fifth human being among the officials.
The reason I think that's worked is because it's instant.
Yeah.
You don't have to refer it to anybody who then takes however long it needs to have a look.
And there's no subjective assessment.
And the players can't protest at whatever decision is given because the technology will always be correct. It's as accurate as that. But yeah, 5 seconds, little beep or whatever it is, or a little light comes on the referee's watch, and he knows instantly whether it's goal or not. With things like that, it becomes about opinion. Goal line technology is based entirely on scientific facts. This is nothing to do with scientific facts. It's based on an opinion. And as we're proving, and other people are proving, opinions can wildly vary. Having said all that, I do think it was the correct decision to send Klukas off, just because of the circumstances in which it led to it. I would think that I think Klukas is blameless, certainly, because Sanchez could still easily have missed the penalty. I think the person who seriously needs a bollocking after that is Jakupovic for flying out of the goal like a complete head case in the seconds leading up to the header going towards goal that Klukas blocked. I suppose we should be grateful that with an instant red card like that, Klukas just has a one-match ban, doesn't he, for a deliberate handball? If it had been a violent conduct, he would have got 3 matches. So he's going to miss the Burnley game in just under a fortnight's time, but we're not going to lose him, an important player, for too long.
He must have considered violent conduct against Jakupovic. I mean, maybe it's just because we're all in love with Jakupovic now that we're conveniently using Clattenburg's decision to let him off, because I just thought it was an absolutely bell-ended decision. And if I was Jakubovic, I'd be saying to Klukas, can we swap suspensions because that's on me.
He must feel invincible at the Emirates, given what he did in that what he did in that FA Cup tie, and then he's thought, right, well, we're 90 minutes into this game. The only time I've been beaten was by a goal that shouldn't have been allowed because it went in off the player's hand. I can do anything. There could be some logic because he is quite a cocky character anyway when he's and quite a Machiavellian character as well. I think you only have to look back at that very first game when he had that really strange injury against Sheffield Wednesday. And
injury.
Yeah, exactly. Put that in inverted commas for those of you who only have the audio of this of this podcast. But yeah, he is quite a changeable and an unusual character, and that was certainly an unusual characteristic to come flying out of a goal for a ball that there was a defender waiting to challenge Sanchez for the ball, not Sanchez, whoever it was who was attacking the ball. There was a defender waiting. There was absolutely no cause for Jakubovic to be there.
Well, when I saw a flash of orange, I was genuinely hoping it was an Arsenal steward because their jackets are exactly the same colour as Jakubovic's.
If it had been an Arsenal steward, he would have shown a lot more passion for the fight than any of the Arsenal fans. I mean, we all watched it on TV. What a whinging bunch of arses they are. I mean, every time Arsenal gave the ball away, and they did give. Arsenal were poor. I mean, a lot of people have said Arsenal just about deserved the win. I don't think they did. I mean, ultimately, they've won the game with a handball that an awful lot of referees, a handball goal that an awful lot of referees would have given as handball, and then a penalty in injury time. That doesn't sound like, all right, a 2-0 win is a 2-0 win, but that doesn't sound like a team that's dominated a match at all.
Well, one Arsenal player showed a little bit of fight in perhaps the worst decision he'll ever make ever. And some of the photographs that have come from that incident, and the best one, of course, being captioned as Tom, Dick and Harry. Wonderful.
Theo Walcott, bless him. No, let's not. I mean, he still looks, although he's got a sort of some bum fluff, he still looks the same as that 16-year-old kid that got taken to the World Cup in, whenever it was, 2006. But squaring up to Harry Maguire like that, I mean, Harry Maguire, the only thing that would have made that better, because it looked wonderful on TV, didn't it? The only thing that would have made that better if Harry Maguire, instead of getting angry with Walcott, had just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed and then just walked away. And Walcott got angrier and angrier. I thought he was going to...
smirk was priceless, wasn't it? You know, just said, do you really think you've got a chance in this?
It was like Walcott. He got angrier and angrier. It was as if he was going to disappear into himself with anger. It was brilliant. And more to the point, he should have been punished.
Well, if I was refereeing a match and a player threw the ball at me in a fit of pique like that, I might actually be thinking about whether or not they were going to carry the rest of that game on, because it is a little bit more than petulantly throwing it to the floor. I'd send them off. I think it's just pathetic. There was nothing to even provoke it, was there? Harry Maguire had shown more strength than him when fighting for a ball. What the bloody hell did he think was going to happen?
Yeah, and it was notable that Arsenal substituted him not long afterwards as well. But so it was quite an eventful game, albeit with 2 goals to win it for Arsenal that were not of the traditional form. Let's put it that way. But you look at, I mean, before the Manchester United league game, we were sitting round this table saying we've got 3 games coming up where we are almost certainly going to get 0. So let's get some performances, avoid the injuries, keep the goal difference down, and then after the break for the 5th round of the Cup, because I think we'd gone out to Fulham by then, we might not have done. Then it's like the sort of the regrouping thing for City. We've come out of games against Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal with 1 win, 1 draw, 1 defeat. The only 2 goals we've conceded have been a handball and a very late penalty. The national media are starting to notice us as a team in form, a team playing genuinely good, expansive, attacking, incisive, positive football, with a head coach who clearly knows his onions. Everybody, just a little bit, apart from our relegation rivals, is starting to love us.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, and I'm very happy with 4 points from those 3 games, which is why I'm not wailing and gnashing my teeth at the Arsenal result. I mean, even just the stat that we had 51% of possession at the Emirates Stadium is absolutely delicious. The question now is, can the players keep up that intensity against games that, in theory, we should be more likely to win? And Lazar Markovic has been remarkable against some really good teams. But I don't think it's difficult for a Premier League footballer who's failed at a big club and is trying to re-establish his career to want to really graft and impress at the Emirates Stadium, at Old Trafford. The question now is he going to play with that intensity against Burnley? Is he going to play with that intensity against Leicester? And the same goes for some of the other players we've signed. Because the simple fact is, and I believe it's a fact, that if we do, we're staying up.
Here's an interesting thing, and you mentioned, Matt, that the national media and everyone else is taking notice of us. City are odds on to stay up now with the betting market, so it's not just people issuing sentiment, it's people actually putting their money where their mouth is, and we are now more likely to stay up than not, which is interesting. But
beyond that, I don't think it's beyond. What's our record? Premier League finish 16th, isn't it? I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility. We'll go higher than that.
Oh, steady on, Matthew.
I've gone for 14th.
Well, you're wrong. Let's just settle for 17th if we can possibly scramble that after the summer we had. Then I'll take that. But we've got to do it, like Les says. Now we've got games against teams that we're going to fancy, and we're going to start as favourites against to tackle. Now, I don't think our poor record against Burnley requires any real introduction to anyone watching, because it's lamentable, and the fact that they've not won away from home this season suggests there's a certain inevitability to their winning against us in a couple of weeks. So the same application and the same desire and the same quality's got to be evident, and it's Marco Silva's job now to sit them all down, let them have a little bit of a break, because I think that could be useful. I wish we were in the cup, but we're not, so let's make the most of it by having a bit of an opportunity to take stock of where we are. But then we've got to come back in exactly the same manner against Burnley, because if we lose to Burnley, then it was all not necessarily for nothing, but it's all just been not capitalised upon. If we beat Burnley, we'll probably get out the bottom three for the first time in a fair old while. How does Marco Silva make sure that happens?
The reason I mentioned that particular position is because there's only us, of all the teams around the bottom at the moment. I mean, we're not the only ones in a bit of form, even though we've just lost. But Swansea are as well. So let's assume that City and Swansea can continue this in games the way you'd expect us to. I know we've got to play each other very soon, but that's to one side. But Sunderland are in free fall. I mean, fancy going to Crystal Palace and winning 4-0 and then losing at home 4-0 to Southampton, therefore completely ruining all that good work at Selhurst Park.
Excellent.
It was brilliant, wasn't it? It was fantastic. Palace, I mean, that is funny. The way that Palace are just sinking like a stone.
Yeah, but they've got an English manager with good old Big Sam, so, you know.
Absolutely.
I saw an interesting bit of information today that like Crystal Palace have got 6 games left against teams in the top 6, and of that little group of teams who will play to top teams, City have only got 2.
And one of them's on the last day of the season.
And by which point we could already be safe. I mean, I trust in Marco Silva. I think I'd follow him across the Red Sea if he'd parted it. But he's essentially got 2 weeks with the players to carry on instilling that work ethic and that ethos and the belief and all of that. And so maybe that's the difference. I think maybe with the previous 2 managers we've had, if we'd got a haul like 4 points in the 3 games we had, maybe they would treat kind of Portugal for 5 days to a week. They would treat it as a holiday. Whereas I don't think Marco Silva will allow this group of players to view it as a holiday, and they're still not getting any apple pie.
Do you reckon they'll get a day off at any point in these 2-week period off?
No, I reckon they'll be sweating in the Portuguese sun.
Oh, I wonder what you were going to say then. But we have got, I mean, after Burnley, who aren't relegation fodder this season, they're having a really good season. Having just signed Robbie Brady, clearly it's only going to get better. But after Burnley, we've still got, in no particular order, to play Leicester, we've got to play Sunderland, we've got to play Swansea. We've still got Watford as well, haven't we, at home, who probably aren't going to get sucked into it. They've got a little bit better lately after winning at Arsenal, even though they got beat at the weekend. But the inverted commas once again winnable games, they're actually, with Man City in the middle of it, admittedly, but generally they're coming quite thick and fast now. We could get in a lovely best case scenario situation, we could be by the middle of April, by the Easter break, be looking upwards all the time rather than looking over our shoulder.
I think I'm always going to be looking downwards this season.
That's just your very nature as a Hull City supporter, though.
Yeah, probably. It's a season to just survive, isn't it? After the absolute shitstorm that happened in the summer that's just gone, this is just one to try and somehow get through. And we can think about maybe looking to kick on in the summer if we are lucky enough to stay up. It's still only 50-50.
I've got one more question for you before we look back at games against Burnley, because that's our next fixture. Elmo, he's back. He came off the bench. It was nice to see him. I'm a big fan of Elmo, so is Les's missus. Possibly for different reasons. But now that we've got Markovic and we've got El Abdellaoui, is he going to play? Where's he going to play? How is he going to play?
I think he's going to have a role. I think Silva's going to make use of his squad. But there's just a little bit of the Elmo magic's gone, hasn't it? There was... His performances seem a little bit laboured. He's less reticent to just bang a cross in first time when that's what sometimes the game's crying out for. A little bit more reticent to actually take on a player, whereas the one point he'd have no problem ghosting past a player in the manner that we saw Markovic do it at Arsenal. So I'm hoping his best days for City aren't behind him. I hope Silva can squeeze some more decent football out of him yet.
Yeah, that thing about not crossing first time at Arsenal was striking because he had a few opportunities to get it in. Now, you can always perhaps apply the benefit of the doubt, and maybe he looked up and seen that there was nobody there to do it. But I would always think an early cross is going to cause damage more than one that you've set yourself and given the opposition 1 or 2 seconds to get themselves ready for, because it's such a fast game, isn't it, in the Premier League? And if you can do something a second earlier than the opposition really want you to do it, it can make a destructive difference. And I found myself imploring him to not take that extra touch, just get it in. And if it spanners out for a goal kick, then we'll all be real cross with him and say take a touch. But that's just how it is. And I think just whatever you're going to do, try and do it quickly. Try and not give the opposition that second to set themselves. But I don't know where I see him fitting in at the moment. I think El Abdellaoui has come in and slotted in quite nicely, I think. Markovic looks a £5.5.
And Odebajo's still to come back.
Yeah, and before the end of the season, some are saying. So that'd be fantastic. And it doesn't really suggest a clear route back to the starting 11 for El Mohammadi at the moment.
Kudos to whichever of you two who tweeted very quickly El Mohammadi on for El Abdellaoui. I mean, that's impressive.
That's Andy, clearly.
Well, yeah, thank God for Wikipedia.
And my auto-predict is dreadful. that would have been talking about hummus.
All right. Okay, so it is Burnley next. No podcast next week. He says, looking at the camera, you see, I'm learning. No podcast next week because we haven't got a game this weekend, so there'll be nothing to discuss. So we're going to preview the Burnley game, which is our next game a week on Saturday right now. As usual, our previews take the form of previous encounters against Burnley, and or bloody Burnley, he said. That's kind of a watered-down version of what we often call Burnley, because they do have something of a hold on us, especially when we're the home team. Looking at the history, City fans of a certain vintage will tell you that the most famous occasion against Burnley was at Turf Moor in 1984, when City needed to win 3-0 to get promoted, won 2-0, and Sheffield United fans infiltrating the game celebrated at the final whistle. And Colin Appleton resigned afterwards, and Brian Marwood got sold to Sheffield Wednesday. For one goal, it could have been so different. Mike Phelan played in that game. In the equivalent game earlier that season, though, back in the August actually, because the one that on the last day of the season had been rearranged several times because of the weather, City actually won 4-1 with a pair of braces from Billy Whitehurst and Steve Massey. There's some belting looking games from your halcyon era, you two, of the early to mid 90s. A 2-0 home defeat in 92, or a 2-1 home defeat in 94 when Greg Abbott scored, but there was a famous 3-0 win in 96 when City were appalling all season, got relegated, and it was a 3-0 win that literally came out of nowhere. Nobody expected it before. Even when City went 3-0 up, nobody expected them to actually sort of do something ridiculous like hang on. And they did, and we've actually written about that on Amber Nectar in the past, but I assume you remember that one.
No, I couldn't get anyone to swap my paper on that day, so I didn't go.
Oh, God! Paper round. What were you delivering? National newspapers, Andrew?
You know the one that still I think scars me now, because I mean Burnley's hold on us only seems to be a Premier League phenomenon. It doesn't seem to affect us that much when we're playing them in the Championship. But that game in late 2009-2010 where Kilban scored an early goal, and at that point you felt this wave of hope that City might stay up, pulsate through you, and then Burnley then nicely crashed 4 goals in. I mean, that to me is one of the most haunting memories of any Burnley encounter, of which there've been quite a few.
I think because Richard Peacock scored twice in that game in '96. I think Bobby Davison's goal was this ridiculous lob from sort of an angle on the edge of the box in front of the south stand. Going forward a few years, we didn't play them for a decade after that because we were truly appalling, and Burnley clearly were on the way up. I think Dean Marney, oddly enough, given how long he's been at Burnley now, it's 7 years at Burnley since he left City. He scored his first goal for City in a 2-0 win in just after Phil Brown took over as manager. When we got promoted in 2008, there was that famous game when Fraser Campbell scored. Richard Garcia slapped one in from an adjacent postal district, and JJ Kocher and I think Caleb Folan both got sent off.
That was one of those evenings where all sense left the players for a period of around about 20 minutes, and what did we rack up? 4 red cards that evening, equally shared.
Yeah, because
it was absolutely crazy.
They had. I think they had. Did they have 2 sent off as well? I know Good Johnson got sent off for them. I can't remember another Burnley player getting sent off. But we won the game. But yeah, it was a disciplinary nightmare. The referee's report would have been several pages of A4 long after that one, and then after that promotion. So we didn't play them for a year, and then when they came up the following year, the game that Les alludes to. But do you remember under Barnby? 2-0 up, 13 minutes to go, and they crashed in 3.
Typical City. Vintage City, I'd go so far as to say.
Vintage City, right, okay. And Matt Fryer had scored both our goals that day. More recent times, in the Premier League, when we got relegated from the Premier League under Steve Bruce, we had that awful sort of run of 5 games at the end, which were against all teams that were basically the Sky Sports Mega Four, as Andy likes to call them. But in the middle was Burnley. Now, Burnley were below us and clearly going to be relegated, whereas we'd still given ourselves something of an opportunity to stay up before these big games. And the whole point was, scrap for what you can from the others, but make sure you beat Burnley. Burnley outplayed us, won the game 1-0, and that day they still got relegated. So they went over and went over to their supporters and clapped them much more elongatedly than they would have done for just any standard 1-0 win. At City. It was the weirdest scenario that City were appalling, lost the game, but stayed up that day at least, although obviously we still went down, while Burnley were the ones who got relegated despite the victory.
Do we just have to keep on playing Burnley? It just seems like a constant litany of woe, doesn't it?
Well, it's ex-Tigers Central is Burnley now. I mean, they've signed Robbie Brady, they've already got George Boyd and Dean Marney, although I think Marney's injured at the moment. They came after Snodgrass recently as well. I mean, if they'd got Snodgrass as well as Brady, I mean, presumably they've got Brady because they missed out on Snodgrass. But if they got Snodgrass as well as Brady, then it's conceivable we could have been playing a midfield entirely made up of ex-Tigers.
They're going to get Marco Silva next year. Burnley